Alrighty, everyone, let's get started with today's webinar. I'm Ariana, and I'm part of the marketing team for Firearms Legal Protection. And today, I'm going to be your hostess. If you've been with us before, then welcome back to our webinar sessions. If you're new with us, then thank you for joining us today. In the meantime, while I introduce everyone, how about you all leave a comment down below and let us know where you're watching from and whether or not this is your first time joining us in our webinar sessions. For this webinar, we have all of the original webinar speakers with us today. So if you were part of any of our previous webinars, and I'm sure you remember Plenty, he's our marketing director.
Hey, everybody.
And then we also have another familiar face, Executive Senior Vice President Terry L. Johnson, to provide some professional legal insight on why this topic matters so much. But just a reminder that during the webinar, make sure you submit any questions that you might have or you can think of in the comment box down below so we can try to get to them during the Q&A session and at the end of our webinar. But for the Q&A session, we'll first go over any of the pre-submitted questions that we have, and we'll get to as many other additional questions. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Terry so he can get us started with our topic today.
Ariana, before you go,
Give it to me.
I heard you guys had a little bit of snow in Dallas and ice and didn't know how to behave down there. You guys should come up to, places like Michigan and Illinois and Ohio and just see how to survive when you get like half an inch of snow down there, right?
I think we've progressed since last year. Last year was a full week that we didn't know what to do. This year was just like 2 days. So we're getting it down.
We still bought all the bread and milk for sure. Like that still happens. Absolutely.
Well,
Yep.
Well, sounds good. Well, let's get going with this. Plenty, you ready to talk about traveling across state lines with your firearm?
Absolutely. I travel a lot. I know a lot of our audience travels a lot, and we get a lot of questions about this on social media, at the attorney's email. It's a topic people are very interested in.
And really, we hope when you folks walk away today from this and look at it as, again and again, but we think we can answer a lot of your questions. And want to start us off with slides, Plenty? Or Ariana, I'm sorry. Again, we're talking about traveling with a firearm, and this is not something we're making up. This is actually a federal law, okay? And this is 18 USC subsection 926A, and it's basically known as the Firearms Owners Protection Act. And this was brought into play right around 1986, and it helps people like us, okay, law-abiding citizens going between states. And basically, I want to talk about something, Plenty. I think a lot of people get confused and they try to make this one topic, and that's between carry and transport.
Absolutely. We get questions about reciprocity, and reciprocity is a term totally related to carry.
Correct.
And not transport. And people who are licensed versus unlicensed, it can deviate a lot of different directions. So that's a very, very important first distinction.
So let's talk about the difference between transport and carry. And let's talk about transport first, okay? When you think of transport, I want you to think of moving something or someone from place to place. So, we've got the supply chain crisis, right? And what's the crisis? We can't get something from place A to place B. We're moving a product. We're not trying to necessarily use that product. That's something for the end user. So when you think of, you mentioned bread and milk, Plenty, right? Because of what went on down there in the Dallas area. If you think about it, you have people that were transporting those items into your area, and they're moving something from one place to another. And once it gets to that store, then it becomes kind of, for someone like you and Ariane and the other folks in Dallas to use. So when you think of transport, that's what we're talking about. We're moving something from one place to another. So moving your firearm from, let's say, driving from Michigan to Texas or flying from Oklahoma to California, things like that. We're talking strictly transport. The next slide will tell you basically about carry. When we talk about carry, The distinction here is it's basically having an object with you on your person or very close to your person that you have immediate access to, right? And, I just saw one of the comments there. I thought you're going to talk about transport, not carry. It's very important to understand the difference here because a lot of people don't. And when you say carry, again, you carry your wallet. Why? Because you can go right in your pocket and get it. You carry your keys. You carry your cell phone, right? And what else do you carry? You carry your firearm for those of you who are legally allowed to do so. So when we talk carry versus transport, there are two different things. And the reason I bring it up is because this statute that we just talked about really goes into somewhat detail of that. I want to make sure everybody understands. So let's go to the next slide. And again, this slide is the overall law. It's a lot on there, and we're just going to kind of pluck a few things out. And again, I'm not asking you to read it all right now. We'll pull out really the things that truly affect us all. And the next slide, let's advance it one more there, talks about the main thing that a lot of people ask. It says, notwithstanding any provision of law, rule, regulation of a state or political subdivision. Let me take all of the legalese out. What this basically means is the federal government owns this space. And if you are transporting, again, moving something from one place to another, the federal government takes ownership of this space. So this law says, I don't care what you say, New York. I don't care what you say, California. I don't care what you say, New Jersey. We are telling you this is the law on how to transport a gun across state lines.
And
now,
Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of comes back to a historical, every state has their power to make their own laws, make their own regulations. But when it comes down to anything that's originally commerce, but also anything that's just transport between states, how the states get along, that falls under the authority of U.S. code. And that's kind of what this is reinforcing, right?
Close, very, very close, and it's one of those things where, again, because like you said, we've got 50 states and again, 48 contiguous states. Somebody's got to manage those. What happens when, I'm in Illinois and I'm going to Iowa, what happens when I'm transporting? So you're very close on that, and great analogy there. So basically the first part of the federal law says we own this space. So when you leave point A and go into point B, you're under federal law. The next slide will basically say the following, and this is where a lot of people need to make sure they understand this. You're entitled, that means you can do this, to transport a firearm for lawful purposes. Now, the funny thing here, the statute doesn't say what a lawful purpose is. Does that mean, am I allowed to protect myself with my firearm as I go across, state lines from point A to point B, transport? Am I going to a shooting range? Am I going to a shooting competition? As long as it's a lawful purpose, you're allowed to do it as long as you meet the following criteria. And the federal government throws a few things out here. The first one they say is this. Next slide, please. They say the following: from any place where you may lawfully possess and carry. Now let's go back to that term, carry. Remember, we just talked about it, okay? So if you're not allowed, let's say you live in, you're there in Texas, right?
Yep.
If you're not allowed, you might be allowed to possess a firearm. You might be allowed to possess it inside the home. But if you're not allowed to carry that firearm, again, some states have permits. For example, Texas has a permit that, you may have to get, but they also have constitutional carry. So any state that has constitutional carry, as long as you can possess and carry that firearm, you meet the first prong of this, which is great. If you live in a state like Michigan, for example, where I am, You have to be able to possess, and you have to have the ability to carry. So that means you have to have a permit. We call it a CPL, a concealed pistol license here. So that's the first prong. So again, Plenty, you're in Texas. You've got a permit. You want to come visit me in Michigan. What's the second prong? What's the next slide say? 2 other places where you may lawfully possess and carry such firearm. And that's the part where a lot of people fall down. So let me give you an example. Plenty, you can possess and carry in Texas, and because you have reciprocity, and what's reciprocity, folks? That basically means that your permit is recognized in another state. You can go, Plenty can come to Michigan, and Plenty, it's still snow on the ground. Come on up. We'd love to have you. But you can basically come up here, possess and carry here in Michigan. So you are lawfully allowed to transport your firearm across state lines. But Plenty, what if you wanted to go to California? How would that work?
That would probably not end well. Texas recognizes permits from California. I've never met somebody who did have one of those permits, but California will absolutely not recognize that. And I am not permitted to carry in California. So I think that's a great example of where, under the first part of what you mentioned, the from, I'm good to go. But on the two, not so much.
Exactly. And, we have a lot of people ask the question, well, hey, I just want to be safe when I go out to California or go to Illinois or, go to New York. So let's go back. Is it a lawful purpose? Absolutely. It's a lawful purpose because you want to protect yourself. Do you have the right to possess and carry in your home state? The answer to that is yes. But you don't have the right to possess and carry in another state. So if that's the part you have to understand as you are traveling across the interstate. So those are really the 3 prongs you need to understand when you ask yourself, can I take my gun too? And that's what it comes down to.
And Terry, just to butt in and ask you a question that I want your perspective on as an attorney. So there's a lot of states where possess is generally a federal, like, can I possess a firearm? There are federal standards, and then there are additional state standards. But carry, there are some states or some types of weapons that have no regulation on carry. Like, for example, in Texas, a shotgun. There is no permit to carry a shotgun. If you can legally own it, you can legally carry it. So my assumption here is it just based on, I guess this would be English common law, but you can tell us kind of those origins. But if there is no law against it, I am permitted to carry. Is that a correct assumption? And would that be valid in interpreting this?
Yes, if there's no law against it, correct. But again, if you go to, and I'm using California because I'd say 98% of the people on the, watching this webinar can probably not carry into California.
Right.
But one of the interesting things is, California has a list of firearms that they will not allow in the state. And I believe, and again, I could be wrong here, I think they're probably the only state that has such a list. So generally, as long as you can possess and carry your firearm in your state and the other state, you should be fine unless there is again, like California, a law that prohibits that.
And it's such firearm. It is that exact gun, not a classification or a type or category of guns. It's the exact gun, right?
Exactly. Okay. So again, you're reading the law properly in this case. So
okay,
the next slide really takes us back to what I like to say the second part, and this talks about transportation. Let's go on to the next slide, because the first part of the law really talks about, can you do it? Do you meet the 3 prongs, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you meet the 3 prongs, now we're going to talk about how to transport it. Okay, so during such transportation, the firearm is unloaded, right? That's number 1. The firearm must be unloaded. So that doesn't mean I've got my mag in the firearm with ammunition. Am I going to carry one in the chamber, or I should say transport one in the chamber? The premise behind this is the magazine can be in the firearm, but no ammunition whatsoever should be around it. And there's a couple of other things you've got to keep in mind as you transport. Again, we're talking transport here because the first part of the statute was more so about possession and carry. Now we're talking transport. The next slide kind of pushes this through, and it says neither the firearm nor ammunition, like we just talked about, and here's the big takeaway from here, is readily accessible from the passenger compartment. We've had a few people who've asked the following question. You know, in my state, and I believe it was Georgia, the question really came down to, well, I keep my ammunition in the glove compartment. Well, this statute says readily accessible, not only the firearm, but ammunition. And again, notwithstanding any state law. Okay, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that very shortly, because if you think about this, in Texas, and Plenty, you're a Texas LTC holder there, right?
Mm-hmm. I am.
You can carry your firearm loaded in the car, correct?
Correct.
Right. So if you're doing that in Texas, you're not necessarily transporting. Texas considers that carry. And in Michigan, for example, if you carry a firearm in the car loaded or unloaded, Michigan considers that, and I know a lot of people are going to say, you're kidding me, Michigan considers that a felony, a 5-year felony, actually, unless you have a permit to do so. So that...
Gary, I noticed that was even in the Michigan hunting regulations booklet, that if you're going deer hunting in Michigan, they specifically call out, yes, there are certain calibers that are legal for hunting, but the second you get in your vehicle with your legal hunting gun, if you don't unload it, no go.
Exactly. And the thing you really got to keep in mind here, this is accessibility right here, right? So you can't have my gun here, my ammo here, and we just do the quick, put it together, and here we go. That's not the purpose of this. The next slide even goes into a little more detail. It talks about you want to make sure it's separated from the driver's compartment. The firearm or ammunition shall be contained in a locked container other than the glove compartment or console. So again, we know it's got to be away, not accessible to the passenger compartment, not in the glove compartment, and locked. So when you're traveling, or I should say transporting a firearm across state lines, and I'm going to give you an example. It's a little nippy here in Michigan right now, and a lot of our residents like to go down to Florida. Some without a permit, and that's fine. The best way to do that is take your firearm, you put it in a locked container, and let me classify that. Even though the statute doesn't say what type of container, I'd put it in a container designed for a firearm. I would lock that up, no ammunition in there, and I would put it in the furthest point back of the vehicle. What is that? If you've got a car, it's a trunk. If you have a SUV, it's all the way back. What if I've got a truck? Do I have to, like a, I don't know, I'm going blank, a Chevy Silverado, right? That's what Christy has, who works in our office. Does she have to put it in the bed of the truck? The answer is no. She's got to put it in the furthest point back, which would be behind the second seat, okay? And it's locked. Now, some states, and I'm just kind of saying this, some states actually don't care whether it's locked or not. But to transport under this statute, it must be locked.
So the second you cross state lines, it has to, and it's not lockable. It's in a state of being locked.
Correct. That is correct. And the
And that's
next
ammunition as well. You have to have your
ammun
ammunition in a locked container.
well, yes, that's exactly what the statute says. Next slide should take us to the end. And I want to kind of talk about this a little bit more because as we cross state lines, here's one thing. And again, we're just talking driving, and we're going to talk about other commercial types of ways to transport a firearm. But one thing I want you to keep in mind, if you have reciprocity with the state, we talked about what that is. Excuse me. If you have reciprocity with a state, one thing to keep in mind, when you go in that state, you are under their state laws. So, for example, if I leave Michigan, in Michigan, we can have a gun in the car any way we want. We can have it on our hip, in our center console, in the glove compartment. I mean, you can even hang it from the rear view mirrors, okay? Do whatever you want to do as long as you have a permit. But you cross into Ohio. Ohio says, we recognize your permit. However, your firearm in your car must be in a container. And that container is either the glove compartment, the center console, or a holster on your hip. They give examples of that. Now, again, this is carry, right? But what happens if you go through a state like Illinois, right? I saw a lot of people saying Illinois, Illinois, Illinois. Illinois is a little unique in many ways, I might say. Illinois has what's called a peaceable journey. What does that mean? That means that as long as you have a permit from another state, you can drive through Illinois with your firearm in your vehicle. However, if you stop to get gas or to have a meal or anything along those lines, the firearm must stay in the vehicle. You can get out, the firearm cannot. So they allow you to peaceably travel through the state and take care of whatever business in terms of gas or things you need to get out of the state. But the firearm cannot be carried in that state.
I remember, I think Arkansas used to fall under similar language, and they've changed it probably a decade ago. But I remember I was traveling through Arkansas, and I was advised by a firearm instructor. He said, if you get pulled over, make sure you use the term, I'm on a journey, which seemed kind of silly at the time because it's not common vernacular. But I think it was just reiterating that legal language of the peaceable journey. They've since caught up, unlike Illinois, but I think it's pretty interesting.
Well, and here's the other thing, you mentioned that, and we get a lot of questions on this. So I'm traveling in a state that says you have to disclose, right? Now, that's only if you are carrying a firearm, just so you know. Disclosure is a state law. And if you go back, and you don't have to go back to this, Ariana, but the first slide, one of the first slides we put up talked about notwithstanding any other state laws, right? So if I'm transporting my firearm, I have no duty. Thank you. I have no duty whatsoever to disclose to a police officer that I am carrying a firearm, because you're not carrying, you are transporting. So when you get into some of the northern states, i.e. Ohio, Michigan, and a few others that really say, hey, yes, you must disclose to an officer. That's if you're carrying. You're not carrying here, you are transporting. I hope everyone understands that.
Yeah, that's something that I think I've confused a lot. And that's a really important distinction, because I'm so used to what my state's carry laws say that I forget about that difference.
Right. Now, and here's something else, Blaine, that's rather interesting. As long as we don't confuse carry and transport, it really makes a lot of sense, because if you're carrying, you have reciprocity, which basically means you fall under, for the most part, the jurisdiction of that state. If they tell you to disclose, you disclose. If you're transporting, you don't have to worry about it. But what happens if I drive, for example, you've got a Texas permit and you go through a state that doesn't recognize your permit, and you're driving, let's say, to Michigan to visit me this winter, right? And if you folks think Plenty should come visit me in the winter, please put that in the comments. Plenty come to Michigan. I think
Texan in Michigan.
There you go. But here's the thing to truly think about. What happens when you get to a state where there's no reciprocity, right? Well, what you've got to do, quite honestly, is stop in the state where you have reciprocity, take your firearm off, put it in transport mode, drive through that state, and the next time you can pull it out is when the next time you could take it out of transport mode will be either in a place where you can carry and possess, for example, the next state, or maybe you're in destination. Because a lot of people wonder, what do I do if I'm transporting and I get to carrying and I get to a state where I can't on my journey.
And so that's the important distinction between transport's concerned with the to and the from, not necessarily the whole journey. But carry, it's concerned about where you are every step of the way.
Correct.
So switching from, like you said, carry mode to transport mode. Got it.
And here's something else, because I know we're gonna get this in some of the questions that are out here. What about New York? What about New Jersey? What about California? I think we should probably hold off on those till after our little break here. And we're going to answer those questions because, again, you've got to realize what mode you're in, what you're supposed to do, and we'll get into that after we take a quick break. What do you think, Plenty?
Sounds good. Well, and in that quick break, I just want to mention and kind of correlate this to some things that are really important for many of you who are watching this. Many of you are already members of Firearms Legal Protection, and anyone who is a member has access to our mobile app. And yeah, I know every company now has a mobile app, right? But one thing that's really important about ours is it has a map that talks about that reciprocity related to carry. And we're talking about travel, but we're distinguishing it from carry. So that map is a helpful tool that I use whenever I'm trying to plan that out. Hey, can I carry here, or do I need to be in that travel mode that Terry mentioned? So that used to be something that only premium members have. We've opened it up. Now any FLP member can have that. But one distinguishing thing about the premium membership is when you go into these other states, you are now protected in all these other states. With the individual basic, you're just protected in your home state. And if you don't travel a lot, that's great. But if you travel a lot, that premium membership is really important. So quickly, I'm going to talk about kind of the differences between some of these memberships. Firearms Legal Protection offers several different types of memberships, starting with memberships for individuals and memberships for families. Some of the plans, benefits, and prices vary state by state. For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to look at our most common plan that's available in most states. The individual basic membership plan is the bread and butter of our service. This plan includes protection in your state of residence, so not nationwide, just in your state. It also includes uncapped payment of attorney's fees for the defense of criminal cases and civil cases. Again, there is no maximum cap on what FLP will pay on these cases. This protection extends to all legal weapons. With the individual basic plan, you also have defense against extreme risk protection orders, otherwise known as red flag laws. FLP will fight those on your behalf. All plans, including the individual basic plan, have access to the 24/7 attorney-answered emergency hotline and access to the MyFLP mobile app. Our newest benefit, expungement of criminal record on non-conviction incidents, is included with all plans, including the individual basic plan. Members of all plans can also enjoy access to digital content and special discounts. The next step up is the individual premium plan. This plan is ideal for members who travel across the country because this plan includes protection in all 50 states. This plan is also perfect for somebody who just wants the very best benefits. This plan includes all the benefits that I mentioned in individual basic, as well as several more. The individual premium plan includes payment of bail bond premium. generally up to $250,000 in most states. This plan also includes payment of expert witness fees, payment of investigator fees should either be needed in your case, coordination of counseling support, payment of lost wages if you're out of work during a trial, incident scene cleanup. Should you ever have an incident, you're going to need somebody to clean up that mess. That's covered in this plan. The individual premium plan also includes payment for incident-related firearm confiscation. So if your firearm is confiscated, FLP will write you a check for the value of that firearm. Many FLP members want the same protection that they receive for themselves to also apply to their family. That's why we have the Family Premium Plan. For just a little bit more, you get protection, again, in all 50 states, all of the benefits that are included with the individual basic and individual premium plans, and you have this same protection that now applies to your spouse, and these benefits apply to all minor children. And we define minor children as any child living with you age 17 and younger. Whether you want the most affordable plan that covers all of the basic benefits, whether you want something a little bit more that has some premium benefits, or whether you want complete protection for your entire family, there are several plans available, and Firearms Legal Protection has a plan for you. If you are not already protected by Firearms Legal Protection, please check the description below this video where we have a special discount for viewers of this webinar. If you have friends or family who also need protection, feel free to share this code. We want everybody to enjoy the benefits and protection of Firearms Legal Protection membership plans.
Thanks, Plenty. That was great. That's we hope you folks, even for $9.95 a month for the app. I mean, it's well worth it. But the protection that you get with it, and this is great, and even educational things along the lines like this. But Plenty, let me ask you a question. I was kind of scrolling through the comments here, and a couple of folks had some questions, and one gentleman asked about keep it simple, get on a plane. What do you think of that?
Well, we've talked a lot about driving, and you've talked about driving from Michigan to Texas, and I happen to know that's about a 19-hour drive, so I'm probably going to say no thank you, sir. I'm going to fly.
Come on up.
What's that?
Come on up. We're ready for you.
So with flying, there are some additional challenges to some stipulations because this is now regulated by TSA. And I think a lot of people are intimidated by this because they hear, oh, the last thing you want to do is bring a gun anywhere near an airplane or an airport. That's pretty scary and pretty intimidating. But they spell out the regulations, and it's actually not that difficult to follow. But there are some very important things that you cannot mess up. So they're simple, but the consequences are pretty drastic. So I fly with a firearm fairly frequently. Sometimes that's a long gun. More commonly, it's a handgun. And ultimately, the rules are the same. It just kind of determines how you might pack your bag a little bit differently. And the general rule, when you go to bring your firearm to an airport, plan ahead. Have everything planned ahead. Even if you think you know the regulations, go look on TSA's site, read through them one more time just to make sure you're certain. You can never plan too much ahead. So you got to pack your bag at home. And with those regulations, you have to have your firearm unloaded. And I like to keep it in a condition where it's easily verifiable that it's unloaded. So on a semi-automatic pistol, slide lock back. On a bolt action rifle, leave that bolt open. Make it so it's visually obvious that the firearm is unloaded. And then it needs to be in a locked, hard-sided case. And that gets interesting when you're talking about long guns versus handguns, because a lot of times the locked, hard-sided case is your piece of luggage, right? It's a big thing that you're checking that whole case individually versus your handgun. Even if that's going in hard-sided luggage, it still has to be in a lockable case that's hard-sided. So even if you have one of those hard clamshell suitcases, you can't have your pistol in a soft bag. That case has to be hard-sided. And again, lockable. That's something where I think that's the term they use, is it has to be locked. But every airline tends to look at that a little bit differently. So the container that I most frequently carry in is just this very simple. It is a steel box with one hinge and one lock. So to determine if this is locked, it's very simple. You just close it, turn the key, lock it. It is locked. Something like this is great for the range, but this is not hard-sided, nor is it lockable. So this would be a no-go for bringing it to the airport. But what gets really interesting is when you show up with a case like this. Great cases, but some airlines just say, yep, you have a lock on it. It is locked. You're good to go. But some airlines say, no, there are 2 holes for locks. You only have 1 lock in there. Somebody could pry that open. And sometimes they'll even test it. They'll sit there flexing it, messing with it. Usually not. Usually they'll just look at it and say, there are 2 holes for locks. You only have 1 that is improperly locked. With a case like this, my general default is to say, any hole that has a lock, put a lock in it. Absolutely. Or if you're not sure, put as many locks as you see are sufficient. And if you have 3 and there's a hole for a 4th, go ahead and bring that 4th lock with you so that you don't have to go through and buy a TSA lock at some airline store for $30 and then walk back. And it'll take too much time and it's not very secure. Go ahead and have that lock with you. With a long gun case like this, I'm not going to be able to fit in frame here, but it is the same general idea. This is a very flexible plastic case. And so they might say, oh, that could be flexed open. You're going to want to put a lock under all of these. And this I would check as my piece of luggage, not inside my piece of luggage. And that just comes down to how your airline handles baggage. If you fly American, you get 1 bag for however much. Southwest, you get 2 bags for however much. That's kind of where they determine that. So I think that's pretty simple. Terry, is there anything I missed in terms of just, we'll get into ammunition in a second, but the actual firearm in the case, is there anything I left out?
No, you're pretty straight on there, and obviously when you get there, I just want to make sure, because I don't want to forget this point. Everybody listen to me. Do not take that firearm, put it in your bag and put it on, don't put it on the scanner there and expect to get it out the other side. Okay. And say, hey, but it's locked. It's here. No. You have to check that bag. Okay.
Yes.
You do not put it on the scanner and believe that you're going to get it out on the other side. I'm 99.9% sure that's not going to happen. It happens every day at airports where people do that, and TSA will take your gun and you can lose some of your flight privileges. So you've got to go to the counter, and listen to this part, no curbside. You cannot curbside this. You've got to go to the counter.
Yep. Very, very important. And that applies to things that even themselves aren't firearms, but if it looks like a firearm, if it's a water gun, anything that the TSA could say, it looks like a firearm, it's going to be an issue. Don't do it.
Absolutely. Whether it's real or not. So
yeah,
you're right. What happens when they get to the counter, Plenty?
So once you get to the counter, a lot of times when I fly, now they have these little kiosks where you declare your number of bags beforehand. If you're checking a bag, that doesn't change. If you have an extra case, that counts as your piece of luggage. But you do that, then you hop in line. You're always going to have to hop in line and talk to somebody. You'll make your way up to the counter and always just make a point to just be polite. Don't give gun owners a bad rap. Be polite. And then the phrase that I always use is, I have a firearm to declare, or I am traveling with a firearm. Don't say, I got a gun. That's not a good thing to yell in an airport.
No, let me tell you what happened to me. I was in an airport and I said exactly what you did. And you're just my luck. I always get the first timer, the people that are new, that they're training. And I walk up and I said exactly what Plenty said. I have a firearm to declare. And the lady's like, oh, 1 minute. She looks down the counter and she says, hey, Joe, he's got a gun. What do I do?
You're like, I was trying to do this right.
Yeah. So, and I can tell you, TSA is really quick on the scene. I can tell you that much. But that goes back to your point, Plenty. Be prepared to add a little more time to your travel if you're going on an airplane.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've declared the fact that you have a firearm, what goes on next?
Yes. And then this is a form. Every airline has their own version of this. So it's going to differ a little bit. This is the Southwest form. It's what I've seen frequently. It's what I was able to find quickly as well. So it's your customer name, your address, where you're flying to, from, your flight number, the date. That's all pretty obvious. It's just, who does this gun belong to in the case that this somehow gets scrambled? And I'm sure nobody out there has ever had their bags lost. In case something happens, who does this firearm belong to? And then on the back is a declaration that the firearm is unloaded and matches all of their stipulations. So it's free from ammunition in the magazine clip. That's interesting choice of terms, the magazine clip, and has been removed. And the loaded magazines or clips are packaged to prevent accidental activation of the primer. So you don't have loose ammo or ammo that's sitting where the primer could possibly be punctured. The unloaded firearm is in a hard-sided locked container, and I alone am in possession of the key or combination. So it's not a key that's widely distributed. And that, I think, is interesting because a lot of people assume, oh, this is a TSA regulated thing. I need one of those TSA locks. No, you could use a regular padlock, a regular combination lock. In fact, I don't think they're going to say you can't use a TSA lock, but technically, if you have a TSA lock, you alone are not in possession of that key or combination. There are lots of different keys that can open a TSA lock. So I would advise use just a regular master lock or regular padlock. And then my total allowance of checked luggage contains no more than 11 pounds of ammunition and is securely packaged in an appropriate container.
And that container is an original box it came in or a container designed for ammunition. So you can't just put it in any old bag or any old box. It's got to be one designed for ammunition or the original box like that it came in.
Yes. And so a good example, just the factory box that it comes in. And what's interesting is, like you were saying, in travel, the ammunition has to be locked up, or in transport, the ammunition has to be locked up. Technically, this does not have to be locked in the same container as the firearm.
Correct.
If I am checking a hard-sided suitcase and then I have a pistol in a hard case like this inside, it is okay. It is permissible if this is in my suitcase. It does not have to be in the lockbox. I like keeping it in the lockbox just because I know it's all safe. It's all together. And then another example, if you hand load or if you have some loose rounds or you threw away the factory box, you don't know what happened to it, you can get these little plastic reloading boxes. These are great for transporting ammunition. Now, a container that is an appropriate storage container for ammunition. Terry, I want your interpretation on this. When I'm looking at a container designed to store ammunition, this looks like a container designed to store ammunition.
That could be an argument. And again, you're probably going to get 50 people saying one way and 50 saying another. I just like to keep it safe personally because I've been in the situations where I'm traveling, got my firearm with me, I've checked it, you get through security, and then they call you back for some stupid reason. I mean, you take the box that you showed there plenty. That's the one I transport with when I fly. Funny thing is, I fly out of Detroit Metro just about every other week at the latest. And the funny part is they stopped me last time and said, wow, they called me back. You know, I'm at the gate, Terry Johnson, report back to security. You get there and they're like, yep, you've got to open your box because we can't seem to x-ray it. That's a great box you've got. I'm like, the one I paid $30 for that I travel with every week.
You can't x-ray it because it's just a piece of steel.
I mean, I've never had that problem before. So, and again, you know, it's going to vary. But listen, I can do a whole hour on experiences I've had with traveling with the firearm. Follow the rules, as Plenty said. Make sure you're nice, you're kind. And if someone says something to you, pull it out and show me it's not loaded. Do not grab your firearm in the airport. Make sure either ask for a supervisor or ask them to do it. Supervisors should be trained if you find that one or two people who really don't know what they're doing, because you hear, I've been doing this for 29 years. Doesn't mean it's right just because you've been doing it long. So,
yeah. And I think Terry had a good point earlier that because you have to fill out this form, because you might run into somebody who doesn't know all the details or isn't super experienced with this, always allow extra time. I filled out this form, signed it, and then it was somebody who hadn't done one of these all day, probably in a while. And they said, I don't have any tape. Does anybody have any tape? And they went running around to every single desk on that front counter to try to figure out who had the tape. And it took 10 extra minutes for them to find the tape so that they could tape this on the outside of my gun case. So just allow extra time. And then some airport. Oh, go ahead. You had a point.
I was going to say, and like Delta, they just throw it in the suitcase. They don't even tape it.
Yeah.
So it's all airline dependent.
Yep.
Why don't you get your last point out? We'll take some questions.
Yeah. And I was just going to say some airports, they handle it a little bit differently. Usually, a lot of times, if it's a really big airport, they'll say, okay, we got this acknowledgement. Now we're going to have somebody from the airport escort you to drop this off to the TSA area. I know Denver is like that. I know DFW is like that.
Tampa.
You wait on somebody who's just I don't know what this person's title is. They are the liaison between the airline and TSA, but they will walk you over there, and then you go to the TSA place where they drop it off in their scanner. A lot of smaller regional airports don't do this. They just say, okay, you've signed the acknowledgement. We've verified everything on our end. As far as we know, it meets our criteria. Put it on the conveyor. Have a nice flight.
And let me just say this on the back end, depending on the airline you fly, you got to do different things when you pick it up. You fly Delta, they're going to zip tie your suitcase so you can't unlock it until you get off property. American Airlines is going to hold your bag until it's not going to be on the conveyor belt. And United, I know that they just put it on the conveyor. So all of that is dependent upon, again, so many different things. So with that said, I want to make one other point. We've talked about airlines. We're going to take some questions. One of the questions we had is about commercial carry. We talked about, obviously, airlines, but trains, i.e. Amtrak, you're not allowed to carry a firearm. You're not allowed to transport a firearm. And the same with like buses, Greyhound, they will not allow you to do that as well. So
and that's just their corporate policy, or is there some additional law there?
That's their corporate policy.
Got it.
So just some things to know. As you travel plenty, one other thing I want folks to keep in mind, magazine restrictions, okay? Some states, it doesn't matter. So for example, if you are going through Michigan, we don't have a magazine capacity limit. States like Colorado, I believe, have a 15 round. So that doesn't mean as you go through Colorado, I want to make this explicitly clear. If you go through Colorado and you've got a 17 round mag and you are transporting, you are breaking the law, believe it or not, because this law applies to the firearm, not the state's magazine capacity. And that's happened before where people have actually been able to go into California and they check their firearm coming out, and someone notices that they've got a 15 round mag because the state has a limit of 10. So as you travel, make sure you understand the magazine capacity, because even though you're in transport mode, you could still potentially be breaking the law. So going through Illinois, again, even though it's Peaceable Journey, you have to go through Chicago. They've got and it varies city to city, county to county. So just keep some of those things in mind and plan your trip. I know people that literally won't go through certain states because they can't have their firearm on their hip. So I just wanted to mention that. And one of the questions I saw, and we'll get to the ones that folks emailed in, someone said, can a state authority arrest you on state laws that you're violating if you're transport? Well, again, that would be one example of it. But if you're in transport mode, number one, they should never know you're in transport mode because you don't have to declare. Number two, if you are in that transport mode and something happens and they find it, you are still transporting under federal law. Now, they may try to bring a case against you in state law, get a good attorney, and basically that attorney should be able to say, whoa, they're under federal law. And going back to that slide we talked about, state laws do not count when you're transporting.
Great info.
What questions we got, Ariana? You're muted.
Thanks.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back on now, but we have a lot of questions. So let's try to get through as many as we can. But our first one is a little lengthy. Richard said he has a CPL that is recognized in most states. He's traveling for an extended time through multiple states, spending a few days in a state where my CPL isn't recognized. What are my options?
Great question. Again, let's go back to those 3 prongs. Can you can you carry and possess? Obviously can in your state because you've got a concealed pistol license. But can you carry and possess somewhere else? The answer then would be no. So if you're in transport mode, guess what? Really, you're not even supposed to stop in the state for, let's say, an overnight. You know, I'm going to stop and visit my Aunt Jenny, let's say in New York. I'm going to just spend the night here and then go on to my destination. You're breaking the law at that point because you're not, you're no longer passing through. It becomes a destination.
Okay. Mike's question, we have an RV we drive throughout the country from Michigan. How can I legally drive with my rifles and pistols?
Yeah, I think we kind of went over this earlier. Again, transport versus carry. If you're allowed to carry, follow the rules of that state. If not, put it in transport mode as you go through that state.
And I think on that one, what I've heard from some people is the argument between it's an RV, this is a domicile versus a vehicle. And it sounds like none of that matters because the point is simply that you're traveling across state lines.
Correct. And here's the thing, again, if you take an RV and let's say you classify it as a vehicle, which it is, recreational vehicle, right? You still cannot have your firearm in the passenger component. Or compartment, pardon me, in the passenger compartment. So it truly doesn't matter because as you're crossing state lines, you should be in transport mode if you're not allowed to carry.
Got it.
Okay. Frank's question, is putting my loaded carry pistol in a safe within the cab of my truck an acceptable position or option for carrying outside my state, which you kind of talked about earlier as well. They'll be good.
Correct. Check your local state laws because you're not in transport mode at that point. Again, you are in carry mode. So if you're in carry mode, you've got to follow the laws of the state.
And if it does turn into transport, I think loaded is an important distinguisher here.
Fully agree. Fully agree.
Okay. Kevin's question. Some states/cities have mag capacity limits. Are they listed in their respective websites or publications so we can know what they require of us while traveling to or through their locals?
Depends on the state. Again, you go to Illinois, again, in and around Chicago, between Evanston, Chicago, Addison, Cook County versus Lake County, it all changes up. And unfortunately, you've got to do some research. And hopefully our app has some of that information on there. Maybe not all, but make sure you do your research before you go into places with mag restrictions.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned, it does vary even county by county or city by city in some places. So the app has some great stuff, but I think you're right to view it as a research project. And the app is a great place to start, but it's not the definitive legal answer. Consult the state laws, but do your research.
Absolutely.
I think this one's a pretty interesting question. I'm probably going to butcher the name, but Halana's question, are tasers treated like firearms when it comes to the laws across states?
I thought you meant you were going to butcher the name taser.
That's what I thought she meant too.
No.
I would say it depends on the state. Some states allow, again, taser is a brand more than anything else. If you're talking maybe some kind of device that sends an electromuscle disabling device, is what it's called in some states. Taser, again, does one thing. Each state has its own unique perspective as it relates to that type of a weapon. So I'd be very careful, just like knives. State laws vary by knives, and in some locales there is no knife preemption. So be very careful. Here we're focused on firearms, and I can't answer that question because I don't believe that there is a national taser type of law that's out there at this point.
Yeah, and I think treated like is also an interesting part of this question too, because they are not firearms. So these firearm laws do not apply to tasers or any device like this. But treated
unless mentioned in the statute.
Right. But treated like becomes very open-ended and meaning there's some sort of regulation. I'm sure there is. So be careful with treated like as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. William's question: I'm a resident of Arizona and have my CCW. Will FLP come to my defense if I were to be attacked in California, or will my CCW be considered an illegal act?
Okay, so the question you have to ask yourself, going back to our prongs, are you allowed to carry there? We've got a few questions about LEOSA, which is the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act. In fact, you have LEOSA credentials and you're in Arizona, you are allowed to carry in that state. And if something, as long as you are legally allowed to be there and you're not breaking the law, FLP will cover you if you're using a weapon to defend yourself or others.
And that's where I would say our standard is much more gentle in that it's, if you're allowed to be there with that weapon, then yes, it's not necessarily carry, because home defense is a very valid category or defense in many other situations. It's not always just carry, and we don't require a carry permit to be an FLP member. And so, like Terry said, it's whether you have a right to be there with the weapon.
What's the next one, Ariana?
So we have Gary's question. Is it a felony to carry within 1,000 feet of a school in a state that recognizes your permit, but in which you do not have a resident permit?
Okay, a couple of things here. There are some states that allow non-resident permits. And basically, if I wanted a permit in Texas, I can go down to Texas and get a permit. It allows me to carry in other states. Michigan, I believe, is the highest state. I think we've got 39, maybe 40 other states that we have reciprocity with. But I can tell you this, you are not allowed to carry in school zones. There is the Gun-Free School Zone Act of, I want to say 1992. Don't quote me on the year, but I'm somewhere in that area. Basically says that you cannot have firearms on school property. And that is a federal act. Again, that trumps some of the state things. Now, if your state says, yes, you can have a firearm on school property, that's one thing. But someone coming from another state does not have that kind of that kind of privilege that you would have.
That comes up a lot in all these kind of courses that we've done related to unlicensed carry in Texas. If you have a Texas LTC, legally you can walk all the way up to the door. But if you have a permit from another state or you are carrying under the privilege of unlicensed carry in Texas, you cannot be within 1,000 feet.
Right. So that pretty much goes back. I think I see a couple of people said the Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990. Double check, because there was one that came out a couple of years after that. You might be right. I just want to make sure we're just giving the right information out there. But thanks, Bob. And I am not going to butcher your name. I think it's Freda, Phrede. My apologies if I've misspoke. What's our next question, Ariana?
All right, we have Ariel's question. Any tips on traveling with a felon if carrying a legal firearm of my own?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a legal firearm. That does not affect the felon. The felon, unless their rights have been restored, should not be in possession of a firearm. Doesn't say they can't necessarily be around it again. That depends upon if they're still, under court-ordered supervision or things along those lines. We get this question a lot. The law applies to them, not you. So I've got my gun on me, and if somebody around me is a felon, that's on them, not on me, to follow laws as it applies to them, if that makes sense.
Is there anything like putting a luggage tag on the outside of a gun case with your name on it, or does that turn into silly semantics, or does that actually help in maybe avoiding being accused of something?
It doesn't matter.
Got it.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
The key word there that isn't in the question is possession. So as long as they're not in possession, I think that would go a long way.
Got it.
Okay. Let's do a couple more. Mike's question: do the same rules apply to riding a bicycle across several state lines, or like maybe a bicycle? That's a far. I know.
Here's the thing: travel is travel. Whether I am in a car, whether I travel on a bike, whether I travel on a horse, whether I travel on a bicycle, the laws still apply.
Well, and you mentioned something about the compartment of a vehicle and how far it should be from you. How would you interpret that here, I guess? Could it be in the side bags of your motorcycle, or as long as it's in a lock case and all those other things apply, or does that change anything here?
No, I mean, I again, furthest point back from the passenger compartment. You're on a motorcycle. That is obviously the furthest point back. So yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Do you want to do one more question, Terry?
I'm good for about another 4 to 5 minutes if plenty is.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Ty's question: if I fly to Virginia and my parents give me a handgun that has been in the family for years, can I bring it back and check luggage in a locked case?
So here's my thing. That's kind of a different question that we're on. If you own it, yes, but the question, do you really want to go back to one of our webinars about FFLs and taking firearms, buying or even gifting firearms across state lines? I'd highly encourage you to go back and look at that for a better understanding of what you can do, because there's some other questions in there you may want to talk about. That brings up a good point about flying. A lot of people will fly with a firearm, like we've talked before. And this time of year, there are a lot of weather issues, obviously, right? What if I'm going through New York? Let's say I'm flying from Minnesota to Florida. I've got to stop in New York. Weather's really bad. I'm not allowed to fly out. They say, okay, Mr. Johnson, come get your bag. No, do not get your bag. Have them send the bag on, because the moment you take possession of that bag, you have now violated the rules of that state. So just keep that in mind.
So you were in travel mode until you took it into possession, and at that point,
even though I was planning on going back tomorrow because the flight canceled, it doesn't matter. Just something that's a tip to keep in mind.
That's an excellent point.
And someone just asked that question. So there you go, Nicholas. All right, get a couple more there.
Okay. AJ's question: are key locked boxes under the driver or passenger seat considered out of reach?
Again, if we're looking at a transport mode, the answer to that is no. It's under the seat, and that, I believe, under the statute will be readily accessible, the furthest point back that you can have it.
Right. Okay.
How about 2 more?
Okay. Searching through them to find some good ones.
You mean we don't have one with someone riding a cow backwards through, when the sun is falling?
Yeah.
I promise it happened in Texas. If that's the question, I promise it happened in Texas.
Yep.
Or
we
Florida,
all ride
maybe.
horses.
I'm going to Vegas in August.
Mm-hmm.
And Nevada does not honor my permit from North Carolina. I need to know if I'm able to get a non-resident permit from another state and be able to fly into Nevada with my firearm. If you can get a non-resident permit that would allow you to carry and possess in the state of Nevada, then you would be allowed to carry and possess in the state of Nevada. And you would be
And I
allowed to
think
take it in there.
Nevada's pretty restricted in terms of they're not as, I guess, reciprocal as Texas or Michigan or so many other states that we encounter frequently. So do your research on that one.
Absolutely. Someone, and again, I'm kind of going back and forth here, traveling with a firearm that's not yours. There's nothing that says the firearm has got to be yours. It just says traveling with a firearm.
I saw one fly by that was very similar to that, and it asked, traveling from, I think it was California or somewhere else, do I have to bring the purchase papers with it kind of to prove that it's mine? And it sounds like you just answered that.
No.
Okay, we'll do one more. William's question. When driving from Minnesota to Arizona, should a person reroute so not to go through any anti-2A states?
William, that's completely up to you. If you do go through those states where your permit is not honored, again, put it in transport mode and be safe while you're doing it. Ariane, I'm in a great mood. Can we do one more and then we'll call it an evening? Because I'm sure everybody wants to go.
You got it. Sorry, let me search through this one. Let's do this one. Brian's question. When traveling through gun-unfriendly states, can plastic gun ammo cases be used? Must cases be attached to the vehicle? Or can the case be simply sitting in the trunk of unattached to the vehicle?
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
And that's like 3 questions in one.
It is.
Good bonus round.
So first, we're traveling through gun-unfriendly states. Can plastic gun ammo cases be used? Again, unlike the airplane that Plenty discussed earlier, as long as it's in a locked container, I'd say designed for a firearm, I believe they can be used. The statute does not say hard, as it relates to what we've been talking about, 926A, it does not say it has to be hard-sided, steel, etc. Must cases be attached to the vehicle? No, cases do not have to be attached to the vehicle. That'll be pretty difficult, especially if you have a rental car, where you're going from point A to point B.
They wouldn't appreciate that.
No, they don't like that for some reason. Not sure why. But yes, it can be in the trunk unattached to the vehicle.
If this was sitting in my trunk, no. But if it's in a locked something in the trunk, yes.
Correct.
All right.
Ariana and Plenty, any last words?
Nothing new from me. Well, actually, there's one thing that I glossed over a little bit that I saw a question quite a while ago related to ammunition and flying.
Yes.
And I just wanted to, let me flash this thing up real quick. When every time I fly, they ask how much ammo I have. The actual statute says no more than 11 pounds. Do I know the origin of 11 pounds? No, I do not know. But instead of saying 2 magazines, 36 bullets, 100 shotgun shells, whenever I'm asked how much ammo am I flying with, I say less than 11 pounds. So that answers that bizarre question. But that's all I've got.
Ariane, any last words?
No, I was just going to do my little outro, but if you're wanting to outro it out for us, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, I want to thank everybody who came tonight. Hope this was as fun for you as it was for us. Hope it was very educational. And again, FLP has a great app, goes right on your phone, can answer almost a lot of the questions you're asking here. And guess what comes with that app? Great protection, great legal protection. Should you ever have to use a firearm or any weapon whatsoever to protect yourself or protect others. So whether you're staying in your state such as Texas, or whether you're traveling from Minnesota to Arizona or wherever you're going, take firearms legal protection with you. I'm going to turn it back to Ariana for the outro.
Well said, Terry. Good job. But thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We hope we hope you learned something from us. This webinar will be up on YouTube for you to watch if you would like to share it, or just watch it again if you might have missed any of the important information we discussed. But also check out the links in the comment section so you can give us a review on our webinar and let us know what you would like to see in the future. And there's also a nice little Firearms Legal Protection sign-up discount just for tuning into our webinar tonight for you guys.
Oh, they get a discount.
Oh, yeah.
I think I
do.
might sign up tonight too.
Oh, yeah, me
Pretty
too.
sweet
Double
deal.
sign up. But that will conclude our webinar for tonight. But thank you all again for joining us. But we'll see you for our next one.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.